Okay, good evening and welcome back to our channel. Today is the 1st of February 2025, and tonight's update is actually about the submission of Pastor Obi Nwagbo. Pastor Donald Obasi Okore, concerning the importance of clarification on the possibility of IMF taking over the disbursement. He dropped 2 points actually, and those 2 points are very vital. I will quote the points and I will try to explain and expatiate on them. What it means towards disbursement, the consequences of if the IMF has to take over the disbursement. So I'll try to really elaborate on those 2 points, after which I've quoted them. So I want you to pay careful attention to this, as it's going to be very informative and also educative for us. The topic of whether the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, can directly take over the financial disbursement in Nigeria or any sovereign nation for that matter is both legally intricate and politically sensitive. It is essential to break down the relevant international legal frameworks to fully grasp the extent of IMF's power, the sovereignty of the United Nations member states, and the exceptions that could permit the IMF intervention. And so, by quoting what he said, I beg your pardon. Number one, he said that by the United Nations status of sovereignty to member nations, IMF cannot disburse against federal government decisions. However, this point doesn't stand as a vindication to any United Nations member state's gross abuse or violation of human rights of its citizens. Yes, I hope we understand what he meant actually, but I'm going to shed light on it now so that we can get every detail concerning this. Under the United Nations international law, sovereignty is the fundamental principle that gives a nation full control over its internal and external affairs without any external interference. The United Nations, that's the United Nations Charter, recognizes the sovereignty of its member states, which includes Nigeria. Nigeria is one of its member states under United Nations, and this means that the IMF, being a financial institution that operates within the international framework of the United Nations and other global financial bodies, cannot unilaterally override the decisions of a sovereign government, such as the federal government of Nigeria, when it comes to disbursement of funds. In a way to simpler break it down, that is in simpler terms, unless Nigeria willingly agrees to certain conditions that is tied to financial aid, the IMF does not have the legal standing to impose financial disbursement policies on the country. So the federal government has the constitutional right to oversee and also control every inflows of international financial aid, including those that are facilitated by the IMF. I hope we understand that. But the limits of the sovereignty in cases of human rights violation also persist. While the last point that I quoted there might be a little bit in favor of the Nigerian government, That's the argument that the Nigerian government retains control over the IMF-related disbursement. Sovereignty does not grant absolute immunity. The fact that Nigeria is a sovereign country, yet it does not grant her the sovereign, that's absolute immunity, especially in cases where human rights are at stake. Sovereignty is not a shield for a government to violate the fundamental human rights of the people without consequences. And what this means is that while Nigeria, as a United Nations member, retains control over its financial policies, it also has obligations under the international law to uphold human rights, to also uphold transparency and humanitarian responsibility. So if there is evidence of gross human rights violations, financial mismanagement, or deliberate suppression of funds meant for humanitarian purposes like the one that we are faced with right now, the international community, including the IMF, they may explore other avenues to intervene, just like the one we are hearing now, that IMF is on the lee of intervening. You understand? And this will bring us to the second point of what's his name again? Pastor Obasi Okore. That's Pastor Donald Obasi Okore. Now, this is his second point. I hope we are following, so that we can really, strike a balance between Nigeria as a sovereign nation who has the right over her policies, yet and that international organization cannot superimpose over Nigeria's decision, especially when it comes to grant like this. But in cases where human rights is being violated, like it's been trampled on, for a long time now, disbursement is supposed to have taken place. This is more or less like a violation, if we have to possibly say it. But if it appears to be like that, then Nigeria as a sovereign nation is also bound to face a consequence of violation of human rights when the fund that is meant to take care of the masses is being trampled upon. That is just the explanation in simple terms. That means that IMF can also take over, you understand, and disburse funds to the country. Now, the second point that Pastor Obasi raised is that in the United Nations Status on Laws, on Conventions and Charters of Humanitarian Services, there is a clause to curb any UN member states excesses or human rights abuse. Okay, exactly. I think that is what is now even bringing up in the second point. And it is called Case of Humanitarian Crisis, upon which IMF can obtain international court order or injunction to disburse to the concerned United Nations member states through the registered member state bank system, with the sole pursuit of aversion of humanitarian crisis. Based upon this second point, IMF has all the United Nations support, of which Federal Government of Nigeria is a signatory to take over disbursement solely to avert humanitarian crisis, like protest and the rest of them like that. So which, if allowed to occur, shall directly or indirectly affect other United Nations member states outside Nigeria as the scene of the humanitarian crisis. I hope we understand that. So in a broader means of explanation, or just to shed a little bit of more light on that, the humanitarian clause and the IMF's power to override the government's control is like this. The United Nations, through its various conventions and humanitarian charters, has provisions that allow it to step in when a government's action or inaction threatens to cause a humanitarian crisis within the people or within the ecosystem. And this is where the argument for IMF that intervention gains weight precisely. So if the federal government of Nigeria or any other United Nations member state is found to be deliberately withholding funds that is meant for humanitarian relief, failing to act in the face of an impending crisis like what is going on currently, or misusing financial aid to the detriment of its citizens, the IMF, backed by the United Nations, can legally intervene. I hope that is clear. The IMF can legally intervene if there are cases of abuse, if there are cases of misusing financial aid to the detriment of the citizens and citizenry, if there are cases of deliberate withholding of funds that is meant to alleviate the plight of the masses and in a way to cause relief to the ailing masses, the IMF, now being backed by the United Nations, can legally intervene in the process. And this intervention will not be an outright takeover of Nigeria's financial sovereignty, but rather an emergency measure that is meant to prevent or to mitigate a humanitarian disaster that can happen within Nigeria itself. Because when there is a protest, or when there is a kicker, or when people begin to revolt, the next thing is they can begin to carry arms, especially because of the hunger and the state of the economy. So the IMF could obtain an international court injunction that will mandate financial disbursement through Nigeria's registered banking systems under the conditions that is ensuring the money is being used for humanitarian purposes. And why is this clause very critical? Why is it very critical? The clause is critical and very crucial because humanitarian crises have ripple effects that can extend beyond a single country's borders. A humanitarian disaster in Nigeria, for instance, it could lead to mass migration. It can lead to economic instability. It can lead to regional insecurity and other spillover effects that can negatively impact neighboring countries across Nigeria and all of its borders, and the global community inclusive. So in such situations, the IMF's intervention will not only be a response to Nigeria's crisis, but a preemptive measures. It's going to be a preemptive measures to safeguard global stability. And this is why, despite Nigeria's sovereignty rights, the country remains bound by international agreements that it has signed. He is a signatory to it. He's a signatory. He has always been a signatory to it, and including those related to humanitarian relief and financial accountability. Now, on the final thought, to strike a balance now, a balancing act between the sovereignty and international oversight. The key takeaway from all of this analysis is that while Nigeria, like all United Nations member states, enjoys sovereign control over its financial policies, this sovereignty does not give it an unchecked right to mismanage or withhold funds that is meant for humanitarian purposes. The international community, through institutions like the IMF, has legal frameworks that allow intervention in extreme cases where a government's financial decisions or lack thereof pose a direct threat to human welfare. So therefore, rather than seeing IMF's policies or potential intervention as a takeover, it is more accurate to view it as a legal as a legally backed humanitarian safeguard that is designed to prevent financial mismanagement from escalating into a full-blown crisis within the Nigerian system as a country. So the best case scenario is for all the parties, the Nigerian government, the IMF, and the donors to work collaboratively to ensure that funds are properly allocated and disbursed without the need for external intervention. Finally, if I may say, as Pastor Donald Obasi Okorie rightly pointed out, it is crucial to pray and also hope that the plans already in place between the federal government, the IMF, and the donors work very smoothly, so that Nigeria does not find itself or herself in a situation where international intervention becomes a necessity. And the ideal outcome is that the funds that is meant for humanitarian purposes reaches those in need without any external legal disputes or forced conventions or interventions of any kind. So if the federal government fails to act in good faith to disburse this fund to the masses, the international legal mechanisms exists to prevent a preventable humanitarian disaster. So let us hope that Nigeria does not become a case study in the dangers of financial mismanagement in this case, and instead emerges as an example of how effective governance and international cooperation can work in harmony for the greater good of the masses. So I just felt it is important for us to strike the balance and also lay kind of lay the dots where they're supposed to be. So this is Princess's channel, a channel with legitimacy of information and everything you need to know when it comes to the disbursement of Sanctuary Wealth Multipurpose Foundation grants and other grants within the country that could earn us some relief and other stability that we need to have when it comes to financial capacitation. So thank you very much. If you are new to our channel, kindly subscribe and hit the bell so that you don't miss out on any available information in time. Thank you very much and hope to see you again shortly. Have a nice rest and God bless you. Bye for now.